The hall at Winterfell crackled with the energy of a coming storm. The gray stone walls, which had stood witness to countless battles and ceremonies, seemed to breathe with anticipation, as if the very foundations of the ancient castle understood the weight of the moment. Jon Snow, now a leader shaped by both his bastard origins and hard-won victories, stood at the end of the long table, his brow furrowed like the darkened skies of winter. It was there that Sir Elara Stark received the call to her quest. A decree echoed through the murmur of gathered lords. Known for her hawk-like gaze and a mind as sharp as her falcon's talons, Elara was a figure who seemed carved from the north itself. Her gray eyes, cold and unyielding, swept the room, taking in the familiar faces with an intensity that left even the most seasoned warriors gazing into their cups. We face uncertain times. Jon's voice broke through the hushed whispers, a voice hardened by betrayal, yet tempered with the steel of leadership. The relic of our forebears, an emblem of our sovereignty, is lost to us, stolen by those who would see the North torn asunder. Elara's heart surged with a conflicted honor, an opportunity to prove her mettle, and yet a realization of the dire stakes that hung like a shadow over her family's name. A Stark relic, whispered in halls as holding secrets bound to the very soul of the North, was no trifling matter. Its absence left an ache as raw as the scarred earth after a frigid thaw. And then there was the Black Hawk, a specter cloaked in rumor, whispered of in the races of mercenaries that drifted like ghosts across the war-torn realm, his name a warning of what lay in ambitions unfettered by duty or kin. Frost settled over the hall as Jon spoke further, his words heavy with unsaid fears and unshed blood. The Black Hawk seeks to wield what does not belong to him, what was forged for the Starks alone, to unbind us from the chains of Southern crown and unified kingdom, to remind us of who we are as Northerners. He paused, the silence drawing taut, fraught with shared purpose and encoded loyalty. Elara, it must be you who retrieves what is ours. A murmur rippled through the hall, some in admiration, others in skepticism. The perennial question of whether even the most skilled of them could outwit a hawk when it has set its sights on prey. Elara held her chin high, refusing to meet the challenges head-on with anything less than certainty carved in ice. Alice Karstark, known for her vigor as much as for her bitten tongue, raised her voice above the din. Sir Elara, you go with our blessing, but more ought to be done than merely following shadows across the hills. The challenges were complex, the terrain unforgiving, the lines between ally and enemy braided with deceit, she knew. Yet, in that moment, a figure formed not from the shadows but of them, driven by a legacy they could only glimpse at. Elara accepted the venture laid before her with a curt nod. The quest loomed, promising revelations veiled in the frost-riddled paths and the haunted woods, where legends whispered still of wolves and the whispering winds. She would not be alone. From the mistrust and fellowship in the hall, allies would emerge, a circle of Northerners as unique in their prowess as they were in their foibles. From a wry-smiling sellsword named Garrett, infamous for his scrappy love for ale and brawls, to a wildling scout who answered more to the land than to names, though some called her Ashla. She would need them all. Jon approached her then, his presence like a firm hand upon a shoulder. The path ahead is not without its darkness. Trust those whose loyalty rings truer than their words, and remember our cause is in your hands. Elara inclined her head, feeling the weight of expectation as something tangible. The lichen-covered stones of Winterfell's walls seemed to radiate the ancient chill of the past, casting their wintry breath into the corridors where the great and small alike tread. Sir Elara Stark, however, found the glacial bite entrancing, as if it echoed her own hesitations, swirling amidst the echoes of history and expectation. After the assembly, she had retreated to the solitude of the ramparts, her mind a storm of emotion rivaling the gusts that battered the battlements. Below her, the courtyard buzzed with the trepidation of preparations. But here, alone, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection to grapple with the task before her. Unfurling shadows of doubt clung to her consciousness. Was she truly the one to reclaim what was lost? She felt the relentless tug of the North's obligation, yet burdened by the weight it imparted. Would this quest test her loyalty to kin, her sisterhood with the land she called home? A harsh caw from above startled her, breaking the reverie of her thoughts. A brutish northern raven swooped down, settling near her feet, its beady eyes sizing her up like a curious bystander. Elara blinked at the bird, wondering briefly if its arrival bore any significance or prophecy, an omen come to watch over her indecision. Ravens, she remembered, were harbingers in the north, messages cloaked in feathers. Her reverie broke sharply with the crunch of boot on stone, and the figure of Jon Snow emerged from the shadows, a silent presence there to still the tempest within. The new ruler of Winterfell, forged in battles of the heart and hand, understood the turmoil of choice as intimately as war. "Elara," Jon said, his voice low but unwavering against the gusts. The hesitation, the doubt, it dances in tandem with the pride of wielding Stark steel. I know it well. Meeting his gray eyes like polished slate, Elara uncloaked her guarded emotions for a moment. This relic, its power is shrouded beyond my ken. How can I be the one to fetch it from danger when I barely know what sits within its malice? Jon's brow darkened, a shadow crossing over features honed by struggle. The relic, if tales hold true, embodies more than any can suspect. It binds history, not for gluttony, but remembrance. The North's autonomy may draw from its essence, but it cannot define us. Only our choices can. Elara swallowed, the cold air like knives down her throat. Can I choose to walk away, to let fate deal its flogging without my hand on the switch? He smiled, a wry shadow of hardness and understanding. Sometimes there is no choice, only the semblance of it. Duty's burden is often unwelcome. Those who wield honor cannot cast it aside when inconvenient. Her gaze fell beyond Jon, to the charred wood of long-forgotten battles, to the blood that rushed like ghosts upon the flattened stone, and she felt the North in her very bones. Then came the clangor of hooves and voices approaching the gate, a dissonance against the quiet vigil of the snowy northern day. Elara peered beyond the walls, her heart clenched by foreboding and anticipation. Riding through the gate was a stranger, a rider cloaked in black, his face obscured against the wind. At his flank, he bore a sack, heavy and somehow ominous, an emissary of the Black Hawk, perhaps, coming unceremoniously into Winterfell with the gall of a smirking rogue. Beside her, Jon's expression froze, suspicion mingling with wonder. "It's begun," he muttered. At those words, the reluctance seemed to slough away from Elara like the shedding of an icebound skin. She could not allow the North's fate to waft into the frigid unknown, not when the glint of hope shimmered beneath the despair. As they watched the rider alight, Jon's hand settled once more on Elara's shoulder, that firm northern resolve passing between them along with Winterfell's breath. "Let us see what he carries, and be wary of a hawk's might in the guise of a dove." The courtyard was a flurry of snow and tension as the stranger dismounted, his cloak billowing like a dark cloud unraveling in the winter sky. Elara, her mind still haunted by Jon's words, descended the stairwell with resolve hardening like the ice underfoot. She found herself flanked by the growing assembly of Winterfell's denizens, eyes fixed on this new figure now illuminated by torchlight. The stranger's face emerged from beneath his hood, pale and grim, as if carved by the North's relentless winds. His hair clung to his brow in damp obsidian tendrils, and his eyes, cold and calculating, swept across the gathered northerners with disinterest. "Speak your purpose or return from whence you came," Jon commanded, his voice steady even as the winds attempted to swallow his words. The rider stepped forward, the sack hanging from his hand brushing against the ground, culminating in a rolling clink of metal. "I bring a message, a gift, if you will, from the Black Hawk," he replied, his voice a grating juxtaposition of honey and venom. "A gift from a thief is naught but an insult," Elara said, the steel of the Stark name echoing off her tongue. The rider took no offense, his lips curling into a knowing smirk as he swept the sack open. He pulled out a singular piece, a dagger crafted with the ancient runes of the Old North, its blade glinting with the promise of blood and moonlight. Gasps rippled through the crowd almost audibly as the artifact was recognized, an heirloom of legend thought lost long before the relic. "A gesture," the rider continued, "of goodwill and a warning should you seek what does not wish to be found." His gaze settled on Elara as if measuring the depth of her metal. The cold air settled heavily amongst them as Jon took a step forward, his presence an unwavering force against the winter's chill. And if we do seek what was stolen, what message carries your blade then? The rider laughed, a hollow sound that drifted on the air. Retribution, wildfire in the snow. Before the tension could crystallize into violence, voices echoed from the walls themselves. In that moment, Alice Karstark appeared, flanked by the wildling, Ashla, and the sellsword Garrett, their arrival as inevitable as the dawning of another day in the north. "Then take us to this Blackhawk, or perish in the snow, nameless," Alice declared, her voice ringing true against the frozen walls. Garrett, his demeanor at once frivolous and cutting, took note of the weapon, speaking before Elara could muster her retort. "By the old gods, that's a handsome blade for a mere warning. Perhaps the Blackhawk wishes you a fond farewell, milady." Elara knew this was their moment, the gathering allyship shaped from bonds awaiting to be forged through shared trial. She turned to Ashla, her feral gaze speaking a private reliance over the many nights they would shed into the wilderness. Ashla, ever alert, nodded almost imperceptibly. "The wilds speak a language of their own. We will track them as the wolves track prey." The rider shifted, almost uneasy before the collective resolve. His bravado melted in the face of unity, a resolve not so easily broken. "I leave you with your trinket and words to ponder." He spared one last look at Elara, as though seeking to burn her image into memory. "May you hold dear what the North allows you to keep." And like a specter vanishing with the dawn, he remounted and rode into the falling snow. Elara looked down at the dagger, its old magic whispering of her ancestors, speaking of pride, of ambitions cut short. Theirs was a lineage of reclamation, and she would not falter where ghosts of old lurk. John joined at her side, his voice a soft reminder in the crisp air. "The choice is yours, cousin, to dance with shadows or fight for the light of dawn." Elara moved among the snow-clad trees, their branches bowed under the weight of winter's embrace. The journey had begun, leaving behind the warmth of Winterfell for the uncharted expanse of the north, where every step bore the possibility of betrayal or discovery. The Relic, a siren's call, cloaked in mystery and power, drew her and her companions deeper into the woods, where the rules of the civilized world held little sway. The air was sharp, biting her cheeks with each gust that rustled through the pines, whispering secrets only the forest knew. Her mind drifted back to the dagger, a fragile bond between what was known and what lay ahead, a tangible reminder of the past's grip on the future. Ashla, moving with the grace of a shadow cast long against the snow, led the way. Her senses attuned to the wilderness, each footfall a soft whisper in the endless white. "There's movement ahead," she spoke quietly, her voice merging with the breeze. Not of man, but closer kin to the land itself. Beside Elara, Garrett shifted, unease masked with jest. "Beasts more likely than ghosts," he mused, though his hand lingered at the hilt of his blade. "Yet be wary still. In these woods, truth and tale may yet cohabitate." Alice, ever watchful, kept her eyes to the flank, perceiving threat in silence more than in discord. Wildlings or something worse, it matters little. We march toward danger with only the hope of finding it before it finds us. Elara nodded, her resolve firm amidst uncertainty. The woods seemed eternal, every tree a sentinel of forgotten eras, as if the north itself breathed in tandem with their journey. We press on. The Blackhawk's shadow looms long, but our courage must outstretch it. Their path wound through the dense forest, branches clawing at their cloaks like skeletal fingers intent on holding them back. The world felt altered, each step deeper, taking them further into an unknown that defied their understanding. As dusk fell, casting the forest into sepulchral darkness, the group halted. Ashla motioned for silence, her eyes narrowed as she listened to the forest's murmurs. "Something comes," she whispered, her fingers tracing the dagger at her belt. "Listen." The sound came first as a quiver through the earth, then a distant howl echoing through the trees. A direwolf pack, moving with purpose only they understood. Elara felt the tingle of fear, but also a strange kinship. The direwolves ran these woods long before man's kingdoms rose, guardians of ancient truth. Garrett's hand clenched tighter on his hilt. "Wolves," he spat, "but even they must heed our passage. We're no quarry to be dragged down in this wilderness." Yet it was not fear that held Elara, a recognition, something stirring deep within her, a tether between beast and blood. She knelt, pressing her fingers into the cold snow, grounding herself, a Stark among her kin. "We'll not flee from shadows," Elara declared, her voice as resolute as winter's grip. "Let them come." In the hush that followed, the pack emerged, their eyes glowing like embers in the depths of the night. The direwolves circled, neither menacing nor welcoming, merely assessing the intruders to their realm. Elara met their gaze, steady and true, her breath mingling with the icy air. Not a clash, but an accord, a primal recognition exchanged in silence. The wolves passed, their forms blending back into the night, leaving behind only the soft expanse of untouched snow and the chill fang of the night air. Ashla exhaled softly, breaking the spell that hung over them. "The North recognizes its own," she murmured, the words a comfort in the solemn dark. As they resumed their march, Elara felt the balance shift, the weight of the quest an old friend now. The relic awaited, its mystery entwined with destiny and dread, and with each step taken, the promise of understanding whispered sweetly against her ear, urging her onward into the night's embrace. The night held its breath, a stillness punctuated only by the creak of frozen branches and the distant howl of a lone wolf. Sir Elara and her companions moved through the undergrowth, their footsteps muffled by a new layer of snow. The relic they sought drew them ever onward, but with each mile further from Winterfell, the forest seemed to tighten around them, a labyrinth of bark and shadow. Ashla led them with her instinctual understanding of the land, her figure melding with the trees as if she were born of them. Elara had come to trust the wildlings' instincts, though they spoke little. Among northerners, words were often frugal in the face of fierce landscapes, replaced by a reliance on action. Elara Stark moved with deliberate precision, her eyes scanning the woods for threats or omens. Garrett followed with characteristic irreverence, wielding his only two weapons, his blade and a wit as sharp as any steel. "It's as if the North itself conspires against us," he mused, ducking a low-hanging branch that seemed to snap back after him like a scorned lover. Elara felt the weight of his jest, the truth wrapped in humor. The forest did conspire, but not as an enemy. It was a council of ancients, testing their resolve, unraveling their intentions. She touched the cold hilt of the dagger at her side, the one left by the ominous envoy, a reminder of the Black Hawk's looming shadow and the relic entangled with fate. The air shifted, a harbinger of the trials yet to come. As night slipped into the gray light of dawn, a new challenge emerged. A river, its dark waters swollen from winter rains, cutting a cruel swath through their path. It gnashed and foamed against its banks, daring them to cross. Elara sensed this was no mere tributary, but a gauntlet thrown by the North herself. "We wade through this, and we might lose half the party," Alice said, scanning both banks for a safer passage. Garrett grinned, his confidence irrepressible. "A swim's as good as any in armor, gives the cold a reason to take notice." Elara crouched by the bank, watching the water devour the rocks. To find a safer way would cost time they could not spare, yet to rush in recklessly could mean defeat. She felt the press of the North's challenge in her bones. "We follow the flow," she decided at last, the words born of the intuition that stirred within her. "There might be a shallower crossing somewhere. The river will guide us, if we listen." With nods of assent, they moved along the bank, Ashla's eyes scanning the way forward, Garrett whistling tunelessly to cut through the tension. An hour passed, and their patience bore fruit. They found a narrowing where flat stones jutted up like jagged teeth, promising a precarious passage. "A bridge of sorts," Ashla whispered, testing the stones with light steps. Elara watched her and felt the relief that whispered of reprieve. One by one they crossed, the cold spray serving only to solidify their camaraderie. Each step was a negotiation with balance and fortune. Garrett feigned slipping, arms flailing in mock distress, and Alice barked a laugh, momentarily breaking the grasp of weariness. Elara was the last, pausing at the water's edge, feeling its promise and threat beneath her feet. She stepped onto the stones, the river's growl a reminder of the stakes. Her foot slipped, a heart-stopping lurch, but Garrett's firm grip hauled her to safety, his irreverent grin a balm against her pride. They stood on the far bank as sun-dappled light filtered down, the forest once again enveloping them in its secrets. Elara knew the trials had only begun, though they moved forward with renewed resolve, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the mystery. The relic's call more persistent, an unfathomable shadow just beyond reach. The forest thinned as Sir Elara and her companions emerged onto a plateau, cloaked in mist and the solemn stillness that accompanies the break of day. They had followed whispers and shadows, traversing paths only the north could reveal. Here, high above, they were met with a sight that stole the breath of life from their weary lungs. A ruined keep, its stones ancient and foreboding, standing sentinel against the encroaching wilderness. "Is this the inmost cave?" Garrett voiced, his irreverence dulled by awe, though the jest in his eyes remained ever present. "It sits like a dragon that's forgotten its fire." Ashla moved forward, her fingers brushing the moss-covered stones like reading the lines of a long-lost tome. The forest spoke of this place, not in words but in silence. It has seen ages pass, and yet here it stands, unyielding. Elara felt the stirring of history beneath her feet, a tapestry woven with blood and tales. The north whispered through her veins, urging her to confront the shadow that lingered within these walls. Whatever truth the Black Hawk seeks, it lies amid these stones. "Perhaps the relic itself resides here," she murmured, tightening her grip on the dagger. A tool for more than just defense, it was a key to ages past. Alice approached, practical and unfazed by the creeping cold seeping into her bones. "Then let's not waste breath on ghosts and legends. We move, and quickly. Whatever dwells here may not take kindly to our unannounced intrusion." With barely a nod, they pressed forward, wariness etched into their movements. The keep was a labyrinth, corridors leading into shadow, each turn a deliberate shift in destiny. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and the unremembered dust of ages. Garrett took lead, his blade unsheathed, though his bravado declared he needed no steel against what imagination conjured here. Yet each echoing step belied his light-hearted air. The darkness clung close. In a crumbling hall, time's grasp lay evident. Vines wove like green veins through cracked masonry, and the ceilings were riddled with gaps that showed glimpses of the gray sky beyond. Here, echoes of lives once lived returned as mere whispers. Elara paused, a sudden feeling pulling her towards an alcove, its shadows deeper and more pronounced. As she approached, the world itself seemed to recoil, the air thickening around her chest. Hidden among broken rubble was a shape, an artifact so undeniably stark it was as if her ancestors reached out to her from beyond the grave. Alice's eyes widened as she stepped closer. "Is that the relic?" Elara confirmed, her voice a blend of relief and apprehension. As she touched it, visions cascaded through her mind. A great wolf of shadow, a map unfurling across the north, a crown never seen but always felt. Confusion met clarity, two sides of the same coin spinning endlessly. "We have what we came for," Ashla noted, her tone imbued with a caution tempered by anticipation. Yet, in the corner of the chamber, a foreboding sound reached them, a low rumble growing, filled with the murmur of menace. Out from the dark stepped figures clothed in the leathers of the Black Hawk's band, their presence turning certainty into immediate peril. Weapons gleamed in the dim light, and the still air crackled with untold danger. Garrett took a step back towards Elara, ready to fight if need be. "Seems we're not alone in our admiration for ancient Stark craftsmanship," he quipped, the tension in his voice not so easily masked. Alice drew her sword, her stance poised for confrontation, the fire of Karstark determination blazing furious in her eyes. A tense silence loomed over the ruined keep, the very stones holding their breath, as Sir Elara Stark found herself staring into the eyes of her adversaries. The Black Hawk's men, clad in shadow and leather, watched with the practiced indifference of mercenaries who have crossed countless battlefields. Their presence was a dreadful omen, the kind whispered by ravens aloft. "Drop your weapons," one called out, his voice rough as gravel in the echoing expanse. "There's no need for bloodshed. Our master has made it clear. Relinquish the relic, and your lives remain your own." Elara held the relic tight, feeling beneath its weight the heartbeat of her heritage crying out. She stepped forward, unwavering, the cold resolve of the North incarnate in her posture. "What's ours belongs to the North, and no hawk shall feast upon it. No alliance made in darkness shall sway our will." As she spoke, her companions moved, forming a silent vow of solidarity. Garrett, whose laughter often masked deeper intents, let it fall away along with the guise of nonchalance. Alice gripped the hilt of her blade tighter, eyes a vivid blaze of defiance. while Ashla seemed a living part of the shadows themselves, poised to strike with an unspoken promise of violence held in check. With a flick of his wrist, the mercenary leader signaled his men forward. "Take the relic," he ordered, his tone drenched in the arrogance of certainty. Elara's blood surged, a torrent of Stark history riding every beat. She was a beacon of her lineage, a glacial echo resounding through flesh and steel, and in this moment of confrontation, she understood the story that must be written. In an explosion of movement, blades sang through the air. Garrett fought with the reckless abandon of someone who found joy in chaos, each swing an arc of unpredictable fury. Alice fought with precision, a dance as cold as winter, every motion deliberate, calculated. Ashla evaded a brute, her agility and grace like a swift mountain stream cutting through rock, while Elara herself met the black leather advance head-on. Each parry was instinctual, every strike imbued with the ancestral force of the north, of direwolves and ice and the ceaseless wind off the frozen shore. The mercenaries, numerous and relentless, pushed hard, their swords biting like wolves in a frenzy. "Yield, Stark," one spat, his breath a harsh mist in the frigid air, but Elara's heart burned with the timeless fire of her kin. "Never," she shot back, her voice carrying the unmistakable chill of promise. The battle ebbed and flowed within the ancient stones of the keep, each clash metal on metal, a symphony of survival. Blood warmed the frozen air, mingling with the hushed echoes of past glories, whispered from the walls. To Elara, the fight was more than just steel, it was heart and soul, a test of everything she'd ever known or aspired to be. She parried a brutal overhead swing, noting even in the moment's violence the respect of shared strife in the mercenaries' eyes. And then, as suddenly as it began, an opening, a single moment of clarity. Her dagger flashed in the dim light, meeting the blade of the enemy with a force that sent it splintering. In that decisive moment, she pivoted, driving her resolve and weapon home. The mercenary crumpled, life ebbing like the fall of winter's breath. Around her, the tide began to turn. Garrett's laughter rang out, harsh and jubilant, as he felled another foe. Alice, impervious, dispatched adversaries with unerring efficiency, while Ashla, always the swift silhouette in the shadows, dispatched threats with a silent precision. With their leader fallen and the Stark determination unbroken, the Blackhawks men faltered, lines wavering beneath the unyielding resolve of a Stark-led. The moon hung low, casting a spectral glow upon Winterfell as Sir Elara Stark and her companions trudged through the gates thicker with fatigue than triumph. Returned from their quest, they carried with them the ancient relic, a tangible bond to the past sealed with blood and resolve. The courtyard greeted them not with celebratory clamor, but with a somber vigilance. The remnants of the night's chill clung to every shadow. Elara felt the world weigh heavily on her, its heaviness born from the jagged mountains and ancient forests they had traversed. Yet, as her fingers brushed the relic in its leather wrapping, a pulse of anticipated purpose hummed through her veins. Jon Snow awaited them, arms crossed, framed by the crackling fires that seemed to watch with their own silent judgment. His eyes swept over their party, lingered on the encased relic, and then met Elara's. In those gray depths, she read a mixture of approval and burden shared. "You've returned. You've done what many would not have dared," Jon acknowledged, his voice strong, though shadowed by unspoken concerns. "The North owes you much more than gratitude." Elara inclined her head, a weary nod. "This victory does not come without cost. The relic is home, but so too shall we bear the memories of what was lost and gained." Her words held a gritty truth, the euphoric aftermath tempered with a resilience steepened in lineage. Alice stepped forward, her eyes catching the various curious gazes with defiance tinted by wistfulness. "We've seen corridors of history unfold unlike any, Jon. What dwells within those stones, it's no pretty tale." Garrett, his usual levity dimmed but not vanquished, added with a crooked smile, "It seems there's more to your cousin than meets the eye, my lord. A lion among wolves, perhaps. If Westeros ever needed tales of bravery, Sir Elara Stark provides them aplenty." Here, Jon's expression softened, though his resolve remained constant. "You've all done well. The relic's resting place remains a decision for another dawn. Tonight, you rest." The land was quieter now, the horizon stretching before them, an unwritten promise painted in the streaked hues of the approaching dawn. As Elara watched the transformation, a question loomed. The North was changed, indeed, but had they truly secured its future? Deep within, she realized the quest for the relic was only a thread in a vast tapestry, interwoven with secrets and agendas looming still like storm clouds. Even triumphant, there would always be veils unlifted and tales yet to weave. The companions drifted from Jon's company, seeking solace in the familiar stone walls of Winterfell. Alone for a moment, Elara wandered to the battlements, where the world stretched beyond, a landscape steeped in snow and possibility. Ashla joined her there, her presence a quiet acknowledgement of kinship forged in shared endeavor. The wildling's gaze was on the rising sun, golden light slowly dispelling the night. "Wolves have run these hills before us, and they will again," Ashla said softly, her words both omen and assurance. Elara nodded, feeling the North bind her more intimately than before. The relic's return doesn't end our story. It's but a chapter, an invocation of what is yet to come, a truth whispered by the ancients which still echoes. As the light spilled over the land, thawing the last of the night's grasp, a sense of purpose thrummed through Elara, a rallying cry upon which new ventures would rise. Ahead, the vast and wild North awaited to be reclaimed, their adventures marked not by relics, but by strength and unity. With a final look at the dawn, Elara turned from the battlements, ready to face whatever shore lay ahead, the dawn of a new age hinted at, with every step back into the heart of Winterfell, back into the crucible from which she and her kin must forge their legacy once more.